LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the September 24th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 14 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, informative media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. I've gotten a couple political comedy clips, one from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday, and then actually sort of, I don't know, I guess I wouldn't call it unintended political comedy, but political comedy from the real news on AM Joy this morning on MSNBC, actually talking about Steph Curry's reaction to being targeted by the President of the United States for being an athlete who doesn't want to support white supremacy in the White House, I guess you would say, but white supremacy house or White House supremacy, I don't know how you would phrase that exactly, but I have two main topics I'm covering. You can see the topics described down in the video description. If you're watching as a recorded show, I put time indexes down there so you can skip between the two topics. I've also put a link down there to my 14 clips. These are the notes that I use to remind myself what's in the clips. You might be able to understand all the notes, or maybe not, but you should at least be able to understand which network, who are the people speaking in the clip, what's the topic, if you want to follow along that way. The two main topics I'm covering are Trump versus sports, this big fight Trump has picked with NFL and even NBA athletes as to whether they need to stand for the national anthem. And then I'll have some more clips on what Trump might be trying to cover up, which is the third and possibly final failure of TRUMPCARE, the last chance Republicans have to repeal and replace Obamacare before the end of the month. And I'll get to that in the second topic for tonight. But like I said, I want to start off with this AM Joy MSNBC clip talking about Trump versus the sports figures and Steph Curry of the Golden State Warriors here in the Northern California area, talking about how he may know why it is that Trump is targeting him, but you can let me know what you think and whether you think it's as funny as all the panelists on AM Joy thought this morning over in this clip.
And go back and let Steph Curry speak for himself. Donald Trump went after Steph Curry on Saturday. Maybe he was mad because he can't get his health care repeal through and he needed something else to talk about to distract us from another failure to do something that he keeps saying he wants to do. But anywho, he says going to the White House is considered a great honor for a championship team. Stephen Curry is hesitating, therefore invitation is withdrawn. Of course, LeBron James reminded him, and while calling him a bum, that you can't disinvite somebody from something they didn't intend to go to. Here is Steph Curry's response to that last night.
It's kind of, surreal, to be honest. Just I don't know, why he feels the need to target certain individuals, rather than others. I have an idea of why, but.
He has an idea why.
Radicalization of Steph Curry. I'm here for it. I'm here for it. And Riley, but just wait till Riley gets out there. She sees him. Yeah. Just one last point. I have seen.
So that was the hilarious reaction, or the very amused reaction from the panel on AM Joy as to what Steph Curry, I guess that was kind of a joke from Steph Curry, like, why is it that Donald Trump is targeting all these black male athletes, and he couldn't even bring himself to completely criticize the white supremacists who marched in Charlottesville, because some of them were fine people, but apparently if you want to kneel for or take a knee, as they say, for the national anthem, that makes you a son of a bitch, apparently, according to the language used by the President of the United States. And I'm going to show a few different news programs doing some summaries of what happened between President Trump and the NFL and the NBA just in the last 48 hours, starting with this 40-second news summary from Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press this morning over here.
This morning, the first is President Trump's attack on NFL players who refused to stand for the national anthem. It began Friday night with a speech in Alabama with Mr. Trump saying he wishes an NFL owner would say the following.
Get that son of a bitch off the field right now. Out. He's fired. He's fired.
Countless NFL players and owners have pushed back, as well as players from other sports. Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors said they would not come to the White House to have their NBA championship honored there. And even LeBron James weighed in, calling the president a bum. Much more on that back and forth coming up. The other big story, of course.
And actually, the other big story that, like I said, I'll show a little later is the final possible death of repeal or the possible final death of repeal and replace of Obamacare. And I will get to that topic a little later, and I will show the rest of the news summary from NBC's Meet the Press on that topic. But before I get to that, I want to show how ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos with the guest host Martha Raddatz explained the same story, but mixed it in with the North Korea story, which I thought was a little bit weird. In the intro, before the clip I'm about to show, Martha Raddatz called President Trump the insulter-in-chief, and that was sort of the way that they're related, that Donald Trump is insulting the leader of North Korea, and he's insulting all these NFL athletes. And you also, I noticed near the end of this, Martha Raddatz adds in this little commentary. I've talked in the past about how Martha Raddatz is very close to people in the military, and that's why she gets, she got to go up in a jet over in the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea, and apparently there's more of that going on. You'll see they report on B-1 bombers going towards North Korea, and then Martha Raddatz inserts this little thing about how people in the military don't really like people who don't stand for the national anthem, as sort of it seems almost out of place, and I think it shows kind of her bias, as I will discuss after we watch that clip together over here.
Donald Trump promised to be a unifier when he was running for office. If that's what he'd hoped to achieve, he's not having much success. According to our new ABC News Washington Post poll out just this morning, 66% of all Americans, including nearly 4 in 10 conservatives, think Trump has done more to divide the country than unite it. Instead of bringing the country together, he has proved to be a provocateur. And as we're reminded yet again this week, when a president tries to be provocative, it can have real consequences. Let's start with North Korea. President Trump at the UN this week threatening to, quote, totally destroy the reclusive nation, that finger in the eye of Kim Jong-un escalating tensions so dramatically, we were left with this split screen yesterday. On the left, B-1 bombers flying farther north of the DMZ than any American planes have in decades. On the right, that was North Korea's foreign minister, threatening that launching his country's missiles and hitting the U.S. is now, quote, inevitable. This just days after he also said his country could detonate a hydrogen bomb over the Pacific Ocean. And that would be a major escalation. It's been decades since the last atmospheric H-bomb tests were conducted. Aside from the devastating environmental toll and radiation contamination, a bomb could fry electrical grids. It is an understandably frightening thought. And this morning, a very different cause for concern here at home, a concern once again provoked by the president. There he was Friday night in Alabama, wading once more into the thicket of race relations in this country, attacking the predominantly African-American NFL players who say they are protesting racial injustice by sitting, kneeling, or raising a fist during the national anthem.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!
While some, including in the military, find it deeply offensive not to stand for a flag for which many have given their lives, condemnation of Trump's comments was widespread from players across the league, nearly half of all NFL teams, the NFL commissioner, NBA star LeBron James, even spreading to baseball last night. The president's response? Taking to Twitter, doubling down on his attacks, even suggesting fans boycott the NFL. Of course, we have seen that before. The president provokes on race, takes criticism, refuses to back down. This hour will break.
So, I don't know what you think about the joining of the Trump versus sports topic with the Trump versus North Korea topic. I'm actually not covering North Korea just because the show's already going to be over an hour, and I tried to bring it down to the 2 topics. There were a few other things I left out. There was this whole thing about, I left out Nancy Pelosi was on one of the shows and talking about the DACA compromise, and Bill Maher discussed that on his show, and I was going to talk about how Bill Maher was totally wrong going after the people who protested at Nancy Pelosi's office, but left that whole thing out. Left out North Korea, except for what you just saw there from Martha Raddatz in her intro. But did you notice how she snuck in that idea about what people in the military think of? Apparently, she's a spokesman for the people in the military who don't like it when you don't stand for the national anthem, and I guess that's one of Martha Raddatz's bias on ABC. The next summary and the last summary of this Trump versus sports topic I want to show is from CNN's State of the Union. Jake Tapper, as usual, started the show with the State of the Union. It's waiting for kickoff, and then this is a little bit shorter. It's about a 2-minute or so summary, and I think that it actually has a really good clip of LeBron James, better than the clip I'll actually show you in the NBC healthcare clip later. They talk about whether Donald Trump used this whole sports controversy to distract from his failure on TRUMPCARE and getting repeal and replace of Obamacare. That'll be a few clips from now, but it has a not quite as good LeBron James clip, I think, as this CNN clip over here.
The State of our Union is waiting for kickoff. It's game day in America, and President Trump is facing off against those professional athletes protesting racial inequities by taking a knee during the national anthem. The president tweeted this morning, quote, "If NFL fans refuse to go to games until players stop disrespecting our flag and country, you will see change take place fast. Fire or suspend," he added. Quote, "NFL attendance and ratings are way down. Boring games, yes, but many stay away because they love our country. League should back U.S." This debate has been raging since last year, but it was given new light when the president said this at a rally in Alabama.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, "Get that son of a off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!"
The president then disinvited the NBA champion Golden State Warriors from the White House after its star Steph Curry had expressed his reservations about going. The president's comments sparked a passionate reaction from athletes, including this from basketball star LeBron James.
Obviously, we all know what happened with Charlottesville and the divide that caused. And now it's even hitting more home for me now, even more, because he's now using sports as the platform to try to divide us.
Today, all eyes are on the football field, waiting to see how players respond. If they respond, the first kickoff is this morning at Wembley Stadium in London, Ravens v. Jaguars. That contest and the larger culture war battle come as the president's party is trying to salvage what could be its last chance to overhaul Obamacare, at least only with Republican senators. The latest effort to overhaul Obamacare, Graham-Cassidy, offered by Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy, could come to the Senate floor for a vote this week. Now, already 2 Republican senators have said they are no votes, Rand Paul and John McCain. One more no vote will kill the bill. So all eyes gaze northward to Maine, to Senator Susan Collins, who over the summer, along with McCain and Senator Lisa Murkowski, voted nay, thus killing the previous repeal and replace effort. How will Collins...
And you see Jake Tapper there asking, how will Susan Collins of Maine vote? And a little bit later in the show, in the second to last clip in the show, I will show you 4.5 minutes of Jake Tapper trying to get Susan Collins to admit that she's not going to vote for this health care bill. But like I said, the health care topic, the Lindsey Graham, Bill Cassidy bill that looks like it's about to die this week in the Senate, that's my second topic. I'll get to that in a minute. But I have 2 more clips on the race topic, and like I said, actually the NBC Meet the Press clip I'll show has some more clips about the race topic and the fight between Donald Trump and the NFL. I was mentioning that the Meet the Press clip, LeBron James quote they have is not as good as the one in that CNN clip I just showed, because the CNN clip talks about, actually references Charlottesville, which I think is an important context that is missed in the NBC clip I'll show in a little bit. But before I get to the healthcare clips and that NBC clip that I'm talking about, I want to show two more clips that are right on this Trump versus sports topic. They're both Trump administration officials trying to justify what Donald Trump is doing. First, there's this White House Legislative Affairs Director who I've never seen before, Marc Short, but I guess he's an administration official. And then I'll get to Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, who was on a couple different shows and had this idea that maybe the owners should, like, it had almost like an implication of slavery that I'll get to when I show that clip. But first, here is this total red herring from the White House Legislative Affairs Director talking to Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press this morning, saying that NFL players shouldn't be able to protest by kneeling during the national anthem because high school coaches can't lead their students in prayer in a public school, which of course is a red herring, as I will explain after we watch that clip together over here.
Congress, Marc Short, and began by asking him what the president is trying to accomplish with his attacks on Colin Kaepernick and other NFL players.
Well, Chuck, I think it's pretty simple. I think the reality is that there are coaches, high school coaches across America today who are punished for leading their players in prayer. And yet, when an NFL player takes a knee, somehow that player is presumed to be a martyr for a social cause. There are ways to express concerns about social causes, Chuck, but there's also generations of Americans who have fought and died for the freedoms we enjoy that are represented in that flag and our national anthem. And I think the president is saying that, yeah, players have a First Amendment right, but NFL owners also have a right. And that right is that these players represent their teams. And if the owners want to get rid of them, they should be allowed to get rid of them.
Okay, what does the president think of the fact that a vast majority of owners have come out and denounced some form of what the president did? They think he's creating more divisiveness, not less. What does the president think of that criticism?
I think that the president is standing with the vast majority of Americans who believe that our flag should be respected.
Is this issue, why did the president bring this issue up on Friday night? Was this about, because 2 hours earlier he found out that John McCain was voting no on health care?
I think you're probably reading much more into it than there is. I think the president has felt this way on this position for a while. Friday night was a forum in which he could express it. I don't think it has anything to do with the health care vote coming up.
I want to ask you something that was in our NBC Wall Street Journal poll having to do with race relations. It was the one thing that unified the country in our poll. It said that race relations in America, only 26% thought they were good, 70% thought race relations were bad in America, and this was across party lines, across the ideological spectrum. What does the president have a plan to try to play a role in improving race relations?
I think the president believes it is his role to improve race relations, but it's also important to note that we had an historic election in 2008 electing the first African-American president, but race relations didn't improve under his tenure either. So we are anxious to engage in that conversation. I think you'll see the president taking action on that.
Does picking these fights on Twitter with Steph Curry and getting in back and forth with some of these players, does this help it?
Chuck, look, Steph Curry is an amazing story, and in fact, he's an icon for a lot of young children. My middle schooler idolizes Steph Curry. He has his jersey. He wears it often, and it's a great story of a young guy who was overlooked by major Division I basketball programs. Ended up at Davidson, worked hard at his game, and is now perhaps the best basketball player in the NBA. He has an amazing shot. But what's unfortunate is when they try to politicize an invitation to come to the White House. This president has already hosted the New England Patriots, the Clemson Tigers. He's hosted the Chicago Cubs. It's not necessary to make this into a political argument. He's trying to invite them to say, to acknowledge their terrific season. And Steph Curry is an amazing athlete. But why the Warriors chose to politicize the invitation to the White House, I think, is unfortunate.
Let me ask you this. You were hoping the Warriors would take the high road. Why can't the president?
Well, I think that the Warriors were the ones that first went out and said that they began criticizing the president.
That.
At that point, well,
does two wrongs make a right?
Chuck, I think the reality is that the White House is something special. And if they don't want to come to the White House and the president says then don't come.
Let's move to health.
Now, I think Chuck Todd really missed an opportunity there when that White House representative, Marc Short, said, well, you know, race relations got worse during Obama's presidency. Wouldn't that be the time to bring up the fact that Donald Trump had this whole racist birther theory that he put all this time and money and effort into that also made race relations worth worse during the Obama administration, but Chuck Todd didn't bring that up. I think it might have come up in the panel discussion later, but did not bring that up with the White House Legislative Affairs Director, Marc Short. And I am going to talk a little bit about First Amendment rights. And, you know, the First Amendment only protects you against the government punishing you. It doesn't protect you against your employer punishing you. And there actually are some rights of an employer to control the speech of employees. Like, you know, if you work at McDonald's, you can't, you know, every time you give out your change, you can't say, you know, like, thanks for coming to McDonald's, America sucks, or whatever. But I think you could probably get fired from McDonald's if you did that on the job. You know, your employer has a right to control your speech to the public, and NFL players are performers. That's not saying I don't support their right to free speech. I think that they do have, I do support what they're doing. And of course, NFL players are not at-will employees. They have a really strong players union that negotiates these really complicated legal contracts, and so they can't be fired just for any reason. There has to be a real reason under their contract, and this doesn't really fit there. And actually, the other important point is that the owners don't really want to discipline the players. All the owners that have come out so far have been on the players' side, so that is one of the reasons that I think Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary for the Trump administration, is totally off base in his suggestions to the owners when talking to Martha Raddatz over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos over in this last clip on this topic over here.
Mnuchin, with all the urgent issues, Korea, healthcare, why is the president even talking about NFL players and disinviting NBA players to the White House?
Good morning. It's great to be here with you. You know, the NFL has all different types of rules. You can't have stickers on your helmet. You have to have your jerseys tucked in. I think what the president is saying is that the owner should have a rule that players should have to stand in respect for the national anthem. This isn't about Democrats. It's not about Republicans. It's not about race. It's not about free speech. They can do free speech on their own time. That this is about respect for the military and the first responders and the country.
The president is calling them SOBs. Is that the kind of language, no matter how you feel about the issue, that he should be using?
I think the president can use whatever language he wants to use. I think the issue is the topic, okay? And the topic, I agree with the president. Why does the NFL have all these other rules that they enforce, that they fine players? This is about respect for the military, the first responders. I was down at the 9/11 memorial yesterday.
Is it not about the First Amendment? Is it not about their First Amendment rights?
No, it's not. They have the right to have their First Amendment off the field. This is a job, and the employers have the right, when the players are working, to have rules. So, you know, why didn't they wear stickers? Why didn't the Dallas Cowboys? Why were they not allowed to wear stickers in response to people they wanted to pay respect to? So the NFL is picking and choosing what they want to enforce. And the president says, for a long time, the national anthem, this isn't about politics. This is about respect for the country and the people who have made great, great sacrifices for this country.
Let's talk about the NFL. NFL Commissioner Robert Goodell calls the president's comments divisive. Even before these SOB comments, our latest ABC Washington Post poll shows 66% of those polls say he has done more to divide the country than unite it. Do you see these kinds of statements uniting the country? We even have Bob Kraft this morning, the president's good friend, saying, I am deeply disappointed by the tone of the comments made by the president on Friday. I am proud to be associated with so many players who make such tremendous contributions in positively impacting our communities. I think our political leaders could learn a lot from the lessons of teamwork and the importance of working together toward a common goal. I support their right to peacefully affect social change and raise awareness in a manner they feel is most impactful. So this goes beyond just this issue. We're talking about dividing the country. Is this a unifier?
I think the president was trying to unify the country because the national anthem is about unification. And I think the owners have the right. They should have a meeting. They should decide. They make the rules, and they should decide.
It sounds like many of those owners have already decided that this is a right the players have.
So some of them have. They should all meet. They should decide. And I'm happy to talk about this all morning, but I'm also happy to talk about North Korea and taxes and all the other things we're trying to do for the American people.
Yeah, and I want to turn to North Korea right now.
And like I said, I'm not really covering North Korea, but I mean, I do think that, like I said, employers do have a right to set some rules for what their employees can say when they're representing the employer during business hours. I gave you the McDonald's example before. But then again, I also think there should be some limits on whether people should be fired for their political views, especially when it doesn't have to do with the employment, and whether you stand or don't stand for the national anthem. That seems to be more personal to me. I mean, if the government can't make you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, there was a Supreme Court case that said that public schools can't make students stand for the Pledge of Allegiance quite a while ago. So that's definitely true as in terms of the government. But an employer, I mean, you know, when I was talking about Antifa and the way that they out people as white supremacists, you can see I have the new Antifa book, which this is one of the only book up here that I haven't read, but I will be reading that soon. I was talking about Antifa tactics where they out people and get them fired. There was this Berkeley hot dog place called Top Dog where they apparently fired one of the people who worked there because they had been at the Charlottesville protests. And at that time I was saying that I do have some worries about people being fired for their political views, but you don't actually have legal protection that stops you from being fired for your political views. That there are, like, I mean, it depends on the jurisdiction, but at least federally, you know, you can't be fired for just, even if you have no contract, your employer can't fire you for your sex or religion or national origin or ethnicity, and there are some other protected classes especially in local jurisdictions. Sometimes there's sexual orientation or gender identification. There are anti-discrimination laws in some states and localities that go beyond the federal protections. But political beliefs, that's fairly rare, and I think that it's not right to punish an employee for expressing political beliefs that don't in any way impact on the employee's job performance. And kneeling for the national anthem, I don't think falls into that category. So I support the NFL players who want to kneel for the national anthem. You can let me know what you think, or whether you agree with Donald Trump. I've actually put a little poll here that you can click on the little eye in the corner there and say whether you agree with Donald Trump, they should be fired, or whether you think it's their free speech right. Before I get to the final topic of the healthcare debate, I also wanted to, for the Sandy fans out there, I have one bonus Sandy photo here for you all. You can see right before the show started, Sandy is almost literally all ears. She has very big ears. So that was Sandy settling in to watch the clips with you all. And having shown the Sandy clip, now I want to show one more political comedy clip. This is actual political comedy from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. So this is the last topic on the death of healthcare. Again, John McCain on Friday coming out and saying he couldn't in good conscience vote for the Graham-Cassidy bill. And I'll show some news reports on that. But first, here's how Bill Maher made fun of that for a little under a minute during his monologue last Friday, which is available in full for free on YouTube, on the Real Time channel on YouTube, which is where I took the background framing of this clip that you can watch with me over here.
But no, John McCain, I got to give it to him. He said, I cannot in good conscience vote for such a vague, irresponsible piece of legislation. And all the Republicans at once said, what's good conscience? No, I mean, but they're learning. You see, the problem with the other plans that they had was that they told the voters what was in them. So they didn't do that this time. They kind of kept it all a big secret. In fact, the CBO, that's the Congressional Budget Office, which scores these things, they haven't had it long enough to what they call score it. So they said they can only give it a partial analysis. And the partial analysis is, it's a piece of shit.
So yeah, that's the satirical partial CBO analysis from Bill Maher's monologue last Friday. And you'll see actually, that isn't too far from what you'll hear Susan Collins of Maine say in a clip I'm going to show in a little bit. But first, I promised you a couple news summaries, and especially I promised a couple different times this NBC Meet the Press clip where they start off, this is a little under 4 minutes, and they give a good analysis of how the healthcare bill is very close to dying. And then you'll see Chuck Todd at the end switches back over to the Donald Trump versus sports subject by suggesting, and this may or may not be true, that Donald Trump brought this whole thing up on Friday to distract people from the fact that healthcare, his whole TrumpCare repeal and replace strategy, is dying for a third time now. And here's Chuck Todd reporting on that on NBC's Meet the Press this morning over here.
The big story, of course, here in Washington is the Graham-Cassidy health care bill. The Republicans' last chance, this time we really mean it effort to once and for all end Obamacare. And once again, it's John McCain who has come in to save or ruin the day, depending on your point of view. 8 weeks ago, McCain gave his now famous middle-of-the-night thumbs down to a previous repeal and replace plan. This time, his opposition came in a less dramatic Friday afternoon statement. I cannot in good conscience vote for the Graham-Cassidy proposal. I believe we could do better working together, Republicans and Democrats, and have not yet really tried. Polls show the bill is unpopular with voters, and it is opposed by a virtual who's who of medical organizations. With Democrats united, there are 48 no votes. And with 2 Republicans already opposed, it will take just 1 more Republican vote to kill the bill. But President Trump isn't giving up. At that Alabama rally, the president went after McCain as this latest repeal effort appeared on the edge of failure yet again.
It's a little tougher without McCain's vote, I'll be honest. It's a little tougher.
Even President Trump is acknowledging that the latest Republican effort to dismantle Obamacare is very likely dead.
We're going to go back. You know, it's like a boxer. They get knocked down, get up. Get knocked down, get up.
In Alabama on Friday night, the president lashed out at Senator John McCain hours after McCain announced his opposition to the bill backed by Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy.
John McCain's list, his last campaign, was all about repeal and replace, repeal and replace. So he decided to do something different, and that's fine.
On Saturday, the president continued to attack McCain, tweeting, John McCain never had any intention of voting for this bill, which his governor loves. He campaigned on repeal and replace, let Arizona down. Just days ago, Mr. Trump was optimistic about finally getting legislative points on the board.
There's tremendous support from Republicans. Certainly, we're 47 or 48 already senators, and a lot of others are looking at it very positively.
But by Friday, Republican attempts to rush a bill through by September 30th to take advantage of a deadline that would allow them to pass a bill with just 50 votes look doomed, with McCain and Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky declared no's and more senators signaling they are not ready to support the bill.
I obviously have very serious reservations about the bill.
Are you ready to support it?
Nope.
The bill has attracted opposition from all corners of the healthcare industry, as well as from comedian Jimmy Kimmel, whom Bill Cassidy had hoped to win over.
This guy, Bill Cassidy, just lied right to my face. Coverage for all? No. In fact, it'll kick about 30 million Americans off insurance. Pre-existing conditions? No.
Perhaps realizing repeal and replace is doomed, the president turned his base's attention to other targets, lashing out at NFL players who protest during the National Anthem.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!
NBA star LeBron James weighed in, calling the president a bum.
We all know how much sports brings us together, how much passion it has, how much we love and care, and you know, the friendships and everything that it creates. And for him to try to use this platform to divide us even more, it's not something I can stand for, and it's not something I can be quiet about.
Joining me now is...
So there you can see what I had talked about earlier. There was that LeBron James clip at the end, but it was missing the whole Charlottesville reference that was in the earlier ABC set of clips that I thought was I bet it was ABC, right? Yeah. It was, no, I'm sorry. It was the CNN State of the Union wrap-up of the... that was the one that had the better LeBron James clip. And one of the things I really liked about that NBC Meet the Press clip is when he talks about all the organizations that are opposing the latest Graham-Cassidy bill. While he's talking, there are all these organizations scrolling next to him, and he like barely gets to the C's. Of course, a lot of them start with the word American, so there are a ton of A's on the list, but they stop it at the C's. I wonder, is that like pretty much the end of the list, or it almost seemed like they were trying to make it seem that like the list was longer than it really was, but I don't know exactly how long the list is. But having shown that news summary from NBC's Meet the Press, I want to actually now get on to some of the senators involved. I'm going to have a clip of Rand Paul and a clip of Susan Collins. Rand Paul's come out against the bill, and Susan Collins, you'll see, is very, very close to being against the bill. And then I'll also, in the middle there, have some clips from Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy, the two co-sponsors. Well, there are multiple co-sponsors, but they're the two main co-sponsors of the bill. And this next clip is Martha Raddatz asking Lindsey Graham about how his best buddy, I guess his work husband in the Senate, John McCain, came out against the bill. And Lindsey Graham doesn't talk about that, but he, for some reason, tries to pivot over to Medicare for all single payer, which he apparently is calling Bernie Care after Bernie Sanders over in this clip.
It is the GOP's last attempt to get something done on health care before the September 30th deadline. Your good friend, Senator McCain, has said he won't vote for the bill. You have said the fight is not over, but how can you make this happen in the little time you have?
Well, number one, the only way you'll know how people vote is when you actually vote. We thought we had the votes last time, and we didn't. It's not about our friendship. I love John McCain. He's an American hero. He is my dear friend. I just disagree with him here. My state had a 31% premium increase under Obamacare. If we don't repeal and replace, it's a disaster for South Carolina and Arizona. John talks about a bipartisan process. I'm a pretty bipartisan guy, but I've come to conclude that Obamacare is a placeholder for Bernie Care in the Democratic world. The best you could hope for is to prop up Obamacare because they're moving toward Bernie Care. So there is no process. There's not a snowball's chance in Hill Bend, Arizona, as John would say, that Chuck Schumer can deliver anything that would substantially change Obamacare. And if it doesn't substantially change, it's a disaster for the country.
But really, Senator Graham, is there a snowball's chance your bill will pass?
Yeah, there is. I think Maine, Susan Collins is a great senator. They get a 42% increase. The governor of Arizona has come out for this bill. Rand Paul objects to the taxes. But when you look at the bill, Rand, we save a lot of money over time for Medicaid. We put a cap on Obamacare growth. We make it more sustainable, more affordable, more flexible. So I think Senator Paul's associated health plan married up with our bill changes health care. So yes, we're moving forward, and we'll see what happens next week. I'm very excited about it. We finally found an alternative to Obamacare that makes sense. Take the money and power out of Washington, the same amount of money we'd have spent on Obamacare, and let states design systems, because if you keep replicating Obamacare, even at the state level, you're going to get the same outcome. Flexibility and innovation is what we're seeking.
Senator Cassidy, let's get down.
So it's actually not the same amount of money, and it was kind of weird to see that Lindsey Graham there was trying to convince both Susan Collins of Maine and Rand Paul to vote for the bill, and his arguments weren't what Rand Paul was looking for at all. The next clip I'm going to show is from Rand Paul, although I have been reading your live comments along the way. I noticed I've actually, with all the audio and stream audio video sync problems and the stream problems I've been having, I still got 3 Super Chat contributions from live viewers. So thanks for those Super Chat contributions, and I will definitely get Sandy a treat with those Canadian dollars from, is that Malo 7000? And I appreciate all 3 of those Super Chat contributions. There's this new YouTube monetization program, and I don't know how well it's going to work. I'll have to wait until I have a video that gets a decent amount of views. Last week's video didn't do that well because it was kind of delayed because I was gone all weekend and had to do it on Monday. But anyway, I want to get on to the Rand Paul clip, where you'll see Rand Paul, you saw at the end of that Lindsey Graham clip, he was saying that we're spending the same amount as Obamacare, which isn't true. It's actually less than Obamacare. And we're giving it to the states for flexibility, but it's the amount of money they're spending that Rand Paul, it sounds like he's against block grants, but after repeated questioning from Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, and I cut out one question that wasn't about the block granting and what he would need, but here's a little over 4 minutes of Rand Paul explaining why he opposes the Graham-Cassidy bill over here.
Start with the president didn't just single out John McCain. He singled you out too at the Alabama rally, but in more hopeful tones. Let me play it and get you to respond.
Rand Paul was on that list. They say don't even waste your time calling him. He voted twice yes, okay? He was very good. And I haven't given up on him because I think he may come around, okay?
All right, Senator, in the president's words, are you going to come around?
Well, I've always been a yes for repeal, but the bill, unfortunately, the Graham-Cassidy bill, basically keeps most of the Obamacare spending, almost all of the spending, and just reshuffles it and block grants it to the states. So I don't think block granting Obamacare doesn't make it go away. It just means you're keeping all the money we've been spending through Obamacare, most of it, reshuffling it, taking the money from Democrat states and giving it to Republican states. I think what it sets up is a perpetual food fight over the formula. What happens when the Democrats win? They're going to try to claw back that money from Republican states and give it to Democrat states. This is a bad idea. It's not repeal. However, all that being said, if they narrow the focus to the things we all agree on, expanding health savings accounts, giving governors more freedom through waivers, slowing down the rate of growth of an outrageous or out-of-control entitlement spending, sure, I'd be for that. But I'm just not for this block granting concept because, to me, that is an affirmative vote that I've agreed to keep Obamacare.
Well, I would say this. If you cannot accept the block grant concept, then there is no way you'll ever support this bill. Is that fair to say? Because that's the centerpiece of this bill.
Well, they could remove the block grants from it, and then we could vote on what we actually all agree on.
Wasn't that
HSAs,
skinny repeal?
Well, I think there's a little more actually in this bill than skinny repeal if you remove the block grants. But the problem I have as a conservative, look, I started my political career campaigning against Obamacare. I went to rally after rally saying we would repeal it. I can't in good conscience vote to keep it. All of the spending and say, oh, now it's, because once we do, the Republican name will be on health care, and this isn't going to work. So we're going to end up having Republicans absorb the blame for a terrible health care system.
So if block grant is in there, you're a no. There's no room for you to move.
I would vote to block grant at pre-Obama levels. If you want to look at 2009 and you say, do you want to block grant Medicaid? I would have been a yes. But after you doubled the spending on all of these entitlement programs, we have a $700 billion deficit this year and a $20 trillion debt. We can't just keep piling on new money. There has to be a few conservatives left in Washington who'll say, we really were for repeal and still are for repealing Obamacare.
Let me ask you a question and you've probably heard the speculation in sort of back channels, but the National Review put it this way about you. There has been widespread speculation that Paul is playing a game on Obamacare, that he does not really wish to see major changes to it, and will find libertarian-sounding objections to any Republican bill that has a chance of passage. The implication being, Senator, that you don't really want to change the Kentucky system. There's a lot of people in Kentucky that like the system, but you can't get caught ever saying that.
Well, I think what that is a personal insult to my character, and coming from the pro-war National Review, I don't doubt that they would say that. This is a bunch of neocons who don't like libertarians, frankly, and so, yes, they don't like me, and so they personally insult me and say, oh, this is all a charade. But I think most people who follow my position would find that, as a physician, there's not been a more consistent voice for repealing Obamacare. I've put forward replacement ideas. Right now, I'm still working with the president on letting people buy across state lines in groups, healthcare associations, and the president's assured me that's coming by executive action within the next couple weeks. He believes he can do this. The Secretary of Labor believes he can do this. I think we have some good news that'll get millions of people access to inexpensive insurance. So, no, I keep working on all fronts for free market solutions, but I'm just not for block granting Obamacare and calling it a day and say, oh, well, we're keeping it, but we're just going to divvy it up.
I got to ask you your reaction.
So it doesn't look like Rand Paul's going to be changing his vote on the Graham-Cassidy bill, and basically bringing the funding levels back to 2009. That would be like a huge cut in Medicaid, which has got to lose other senators, including Susan Collins, who I will show in just a minute. But I want to show the other main co-author and a couple clips on this whole so-called Jimmy Kimmel test. That was one of the developments this last week, that late-night talk show host Jimmy Kimmel got involved. He was involved several months ago when Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy came on his show and said, "Oh, don't worry about health care reform. Bill Cassidy is actually a doctor who's worked with low-income people," and he said, "Don't worry, I'm going to make sure that this legislation passes the Jimmy Kimmel test," because Jimmy Kimmel had just had a son, a baby, who needed all this heart surgery, and would have, if there are lifetime caps or pre-existing conditions, Jimmy Kimmel, of course Jimmy Kimmel is really rich, but someone in Jimmy Kimmel's position might have a child who would not be able to pay for all of the health care needed. It could like bankrupt a family, or create someone with a pre-existing condition and a lifetime cap where they wouldn't be able to pay for it in any way. So first I want to show Bill Cassidy himself responding to this issue, talking to Martha Raddatz, and then this guy from the White House, Marc Short, over on Fox News Sunday. But first, here's the ABC clip. Martha Raddatz talking about the Jimmy Kimmel test with Bill Cassidy on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning here.
Senator Cassidy, let's get down to this in a little more detail. Senator Graham mentioned Susan Collins. Susan Collins, whose vote you're trying to get, says she's reading the fine print and said it doesn't protect people with pre-existing conditions. You had the same argument from Jimmy Kimmel, as you know, because their premiums could be so high that it wouldn't be affordable. How is this someone who's going to come around?
One, that's absolutely incorrect. President Trump has said he will not sign a bill which does not protect those with pre-existing conditions. I'm a physician who worked in a public hospital for 25 years caring for those with pre-existing conditions. Our language says that if a state wishes to do something different, as they do something different, they must first establish that those with pre-existing conditions have access to affordable and adequate coverage. Two things more. Affordable, how do you define it, people ask? It means able to afford. Now contrast that with status quo. If you're not getting subsidies right now on the exchanges, your premiums with deductibles can be $30,000 to $45,000.
And how is that decided who can afford it? How is that decided? That's what is missing in the bill. What is adequate and affordable care? That's what people are complaining about. And
So Martha, if I may, what we have under status quo, a family with a child with pre-existing conditions is paying $32,000 a year. Now, that's not affordable. We're being compared to somebody with a premium plus deductible that is approaching $40,000. Now, if I were to say to you, Martha, I'm going to go buy a car that I can afford, you would have a good sense of what it is. So we give the states the latitude to establish. It may be that someone who's a millionaire would pay a little bit more, and someone who's lower income would pay a little less.
But do you really know this? Do you really know this? You don't have a full CBO report, and that's a complaint as well. How do you know?
If you're speaking of the language that it has to have access to adequate and affordable health care, that's not related to the CBO. That's contrasting with the status quo, the ACA, in which people are paying $30,000 to $40,000 for their annual out-of-pocket costs.
And yet you still have the vagueness of that. I want to go back to Senator Graham.
You do still have the vagueness of that, and I think Martha Raddatz did a pretty good job of pointing out the vagueness of the adequate and affordable language that's in the Graham-Cassidy bill. And she kind of pointed out the Jimmy Kimmel test, but, I do a lot of criticism of Fox News, and I think Fox News didn't really concentrate on the Trump versus the NFL aspects as much as some of the other broadcasts. But I have to give, and I'm not showing any clips of that, but I think Chris Wallace did a good job with that guy, Marc Short, the White House Legislative Affairs Director, asking about this Jimmy Kimmel test, and specifically about pre-existing conditions, and this idea that what the legislation does is comes up with these vague terms saying, well, states can raise premiums for people with pre-existing conditions as long as the insurance is adequate and affordable. So adequate means they can cut out coverage for various conditions as long as the health insurance is adequate, and affordable means they can raise premiums to some unknown amount as long as it's still, quote, affordable, and there's no definition of adequate or affordable, and there's no enforcement mechanism. So as Chris Wallace points out in this next clip, it's kind of like a loophole you could drive a truck through. And I think Chris Wallace does a pretty good job of cross-examining the White House representative on this issue and the Jimmy Kimmel test, as I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together here.
A late-night TV host, Jimmy Kimmel, has become a big part of this debate after he talked about the fact that his son needed major heart surgery. He says one of the bill's sponsors, it's called the Graham-Cassidy bill, Senator Bill Cassidy is misleading people about what is in the bill. Here he is.
He said he wants coverage for all, no discrimination based on pre-existing conditions, lower premiums for middle-class families, and no lifetime caps. And guess what? The new bill does none of those things.
Marc, isn't Kimmel right?
No.
Graham-Cassidy does none of those things.
No. This bill continues to protect pre-existing conditions. Bill Cassidy is a doctor. His wife's a doctor. They know how they've structured this. Bill Cassidy is exactly right. But I want to go back to a point you made.
I want to press on this point of pre-existing conditions, because the Republican bill says states can get a waiver. Let's put this up on the screen. States can get a waiver from Obamacare protections if they explain to federal bureaucrats how the state intends to maintain access to, and this is the key phrase, adequate and affordable health insurance coverage for individuals with pre-existing conditions without ever explaining what adequate and affordable coverage is. And then on the very next page, the Graham-Cassidy bill says that, yes, states can increase premiums for people with pre-existing conditions. That's a loophole big enough to drive a tank through.
Chris, those are two separate questions. Do you want Washington, D.C. choosing the rates all across the nation for all sorts of factors? That's a different question than guaranteeing pre-existing conditions. The bill guarantees pre-existing conditions.
No, it doesn't.
You're correct.
No, it doesn't. It just says that they have to forgive me, sir. It says that all they have to do is get a federal waiver that they have adequate and affordable coverage without ever explaining what adequate and affordable coverage is. That's not a guarantee.
Adequate and affordable coverage will be guaranteed to every one of those states that apply.
But what's the definition of adequate and affordable, and what does it mean when a state can raise premiums?
That is a separate question. And do you want Washington, D.C. dictating across the country what those rates are for everybody, regardless of conditions?
What good is insurance coverage if you can't afford to buy it?
Because you're also providing additional financial support to those states so they can make sure those rates stay low for all different individuals and all different classes, including those with pre-existing conditions. Chris?
Well, there is no statement as to how much that's going to be. And in fact, it says states can raise premiums for coverage for pre-existing conditions without any guidelines. There's no question it's going to be higher in some states than it is under Obamacare.
There's going to be some states higher, some states lower, Chris. Do you want Washington, D.C. sitting...
So if you got pre-existing conditions in a state where it's higher, you're out of luck?
No, you're not necessarily out of luck, Chris. You're going to make sure that the vast majority of Americans are going to benefit from having lower costs. It doesn't mean that every single individual will have a lower premium, because that is not what we want Washington, D.C. doing. We want states to have the flexibility to determine that.
And I think Chris Wallace did a pretty good job there of explicating the nonsense that is in this bill about adequate and affordable coverage, that there's no definition, and it's basically, I'm sorry, I mischaracterized it before the clip. I said it was a loophole that you could drive a truck through. Actually, he said it was a loophole you could drive a tank through, so that's even a more colorful metaphor. So good job, Chris Wallace, both in terms of the cross-examination of the White House Legislative Affairs Director and your use of colorful, although I guess somewhat militaristic metaphors. But I want to show the senator who is most likely going to give the final death knell to the final attempt at repealing and replacing Obamacare by 50 votes in the Senate. This is Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who hasn't definitely said that she's going to vote against this latest bill. But if you listen to the cross-examination or the follow-up questions from Jake Tapper over on CNN State of the Union this morning, she can't really envision a scenario in which she could vote for it, and basically she's just waiting until tomorrow when the CBO analysis comes out and either says bad things about the bill, so she won't vote for it, says that they don't have time to really give it a good analysis, so she won't vote for it, or maybe there'll be some surprise, like there's some miracle that cutting money out of Medicaid covers more people. Like, no, that's not going to happen. And if you listen to this 4.5 minutes from, well, there's a little bit of editing here to cut out a question about talking to Mike Pence and other people who support the bill, but mainly about whether she's going to vote for it, which is what Jake Tapper is trying to get from her. She doesn't definitely say no, but based on all the facts, I think by tomorrow this is going to be a no, according to, well, watch it together and then you tell me what you think after we watch it together here.
Will Collins vote on Graham-Cassidy? Well, Senator Collins joins us now. Senator, good to see you as always. Your vote is pivotal on the Graham-Cassidy health care bill. Where are you? Yes or no?
Jake, it's very difficult for me to envision a scenario where I would end up voting for this bill. I have a number of serious reservations about it. I'm concerned about the impact on the Medicaid program, which has been on the books for more than 50 years and provides health care to our most vulnerable citizens, including disabled children and low-income seniors. I'm concerned about the impact on costs and coverage. We already have a problem under the Affordable Care Act with the cost of premiums and deductibles. And finally, I'm very concerned about the erosion of protections for people with pre-existing conditions like asthma, arthritis, cancer, diabetes, and what it would mean to them.
So you say you find it difficult to envision any scenario you would vote for Graham-Cassidy. Is that a no then?
What I am doing is, as is my general practice, is I would like to see the Congressional Budget Office analysis, which is expected to come out tomorrow morning. And I am worried about whether CBO has been given enough time to thoroughly analyze this bill, which has been a moving target. Even over the weekend, I was receiving emails suggesting that the sponsors of the bill are still changing the formula. So it may be difficult for CBO to do the kind of in-depth analysis that it usually does, but that's what I would like to see before making a final decision. But it may be that CBO is going to say that this is impossible because the parameters of the bill keep changing.
So you say you want to see a CBO score. As you note, there have been other studies of the impact of Graham-Cassidy. Let me put some of the numbers on the screen from some of these studies. 21 million fewer Americans covered. That's from Brookings. States losing $215 billion. That's from Avalier. 31 states losing money. That's from Kaiser. As you know, the CBO score, even if you get it in time for the vote, it's probably only going to look at the impact on the deficit and not look at the impact on the issues you talk about, Medicaid, the total number of uninsured. What information could the CBO possibly provide you that might make you support the Graham-Cassidy bill?
Well, I actually expect that CBO is either going to reinforce those studies that you've just mentioned, all of which I have digested over the past couple of weeks, or that CBO is going to say that they simply don't have the time to do a thorough analysis. But you remember when the CBO did the analysis of the first Senate bill and the House bill, it was very thorough in analyzing the impact on the number of people who would lose insurance, on the impact of changing the Medicaid program. And by the way, we would be making these huge changes in Medicaid without the benefit of extensive hearings, and that's what we would need. And so I don't know whether the CBO analysis will have new information that would change where I'm inclined to head, but it is normally the way we proceed is to look at the CBO analysis. I'm going to know tomorrow morning whether or not CBO reinforces the concerns and reservations that I already have based on the studies that you've cited, or whether CBO is going to say that they can't come up with the kind of in-depth analysis that the agency usually does, or maybe there'll be a surprise in there. I don't anticipate that, but I want to wait. It's just a few more hours to wait to see that important study.
So it sounds like a no with an asterisk unless CBO has some sort of dramatic change. President?
No with an asterisk, yeah. And we should know probably within, what, like 12 to 16 hours from when I'm doing this broadcast. Possibly by the time you're watching this, Susan Collins may have come out as the third no vote. And I also saw Ted Cruz was saying that he might be against it in a later report since the Sunday morning news shows. And he also said Utah Senator Mike Lee, so that's Texas Senator Ted Cruz and Utah Senator Mike Lee, who are both like Tea Party conservatives, might be joining Rand Paul in being against this. And certainly if Rand Paul got what he wanted, where the spending on Medicaid went back to 2009 levels, Susan Collins, what you saw there, her concerns would be completely exacerbated, and she would definitely be a no vote, no asterisk at that point. So looks like that's going to be the end of TRUMPCARE. At least what's waiting in the wings is this bipartisan effort with Lamar Alexander, the senator from Tennessee, and then who's a Republican, and then Democratic Senator Patty Murray from Washington. They're working together on some bipartisan bill that would fix some of the problems with Obamacare, but not repeal and replace, sort of stabilize the healthcare market, and maybe that will come about. And I'm kind of torn because this total failure to repeal and replace is bad for Republicans, especially in the midterms for their base. Although if they had passed something really draconian, then they would own a really bad healthcare system, and that would be bad for them in 2020, and especially for Donald Trump. If they actually come up with some bipartisan solution, the Patty Murray, Lamar Alexander solution, that actually might be good for Republicans, but would also be better for the country than any of these failures. So it's politically bad, but policy good. You can decide which one you think is better in the long run. And actually, the substance versus the politics is the subject of this last clip. It's from CBS's Face the Nation. And I thought John Dickerson was really, really soft on his cross-examination of this clip for Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado. I've seen multiple news stories over the weekend about how Cory Gardner got caught saying the big donors are really, really upset that we didn't repeal and replace. And so however unpopular are, all the Republican bills have had like 25% favorability. Even compared to Obamacare, they lose to Obamacare by 20-point margins. But the reason they have to do it is because the big donors over the August recess said, you need to go back there and repeal and replace. And John Dickerson didn't, he barely mentioned it when he was talking in the introductory question, where he also has this quote from Republican Senator Chuck Grassley, and I don't think he follows up very well on it at all, as I will discuss with you after we watch that final 3-minute clip together over here.
There have been some extraordinary quotes this week from your colleagues. One is from Senator Chuck Grassley, talking really about the blunt political calculus here. Senator Grassley said, I could maybe give you 10 reasons why this bill shouldn't be considered, but Republicans campaigned on this so often that you have a responsibility to carry out what you said in the campaign. That's pretty much as much of a reason as the substance of the bill. Senator Pat Roberts and other of your Republican colleagues essentially said that if this bill isn't passed, that Republicans would lose control of the Senate. And there's a New York Times piece in which you're quoted as saying, donors are furious. We haven't kept our promise. The picture that emerges from all of this is a rush for political reasons to support this and not substantive reasons. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, this has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with donors. It has everything to do with the people of this country who are suffering each and every day under a health care bill that is failing to meet their needs, that's bankrupting them. I meet with countless people across the state of Colorado, all four corners here, who are basically paying a second mortgage every month to afford their insurance, to pay for their insurance that they can't actually afford to use. 500,000 people in Colorado lost their health insurance, had their health insurance canceled, because they were told it wasn't good enough. It didn't meet the specifications, even though they wanted to keep that health insurance. And so we have a system right now that has led to higher costs, that has led to fewer choices in terms of being able to keep their doctors. People are paying $10,000 or more in deductibles, $8,000 in deductibles. They're paying $1,200, $1,500 a month for insurance. It's not working. That's the reason why we need new policy. That's what this fight is about. It's to make sure that the American people are better off.
But, Senator, there's been a great deal of opposition from the American Medical Association, from the directors of Medicaid in the states, to the substance of the bill. So all the problems you named can exist, but for this particular remedy, the criticism is that it's being forced through for political reasons. We all know from our reporting that there is great anger at the grassroots and at the donor level. And then you have senators basically affirming that. It seems hard to argue that there is not tremendous political pressure and that that's overweighing the substantive critiques to this bill.
Well, I think that the people who are opponents of the bill certainly want this to be about politics and not policy. But the bottom line is, for the past 7 years, we've made it a very high priority to put something in place for the American people of the Affordable Care Act that actually works. And that's what we have to do. Look, I hear stories from places like Holyoke, Colorado, from Denver, Colorado, from Glenwood Springs, Colorado, of people who have seen their health insurance premiums skyrocket. They lost the doctor that they were promised they could keep. The average family of four was told they would see lower health care costs of $2,500 per family a year. But that simply hasn't materialized. And so what's good policy is what matters to the American people. Now, if people are going to play politics, that's what they're going to do. But I think what we have an obligation to do as the Senate majority is hopefully bipartisan. People on both sides of the aisle will come together to pass a bill that works for the American people, to lower costs and put something in place that works better than the status quo, because the status quo is simply not good enough.
All right, let's see what we'll...
So there was no follow-up after that from John Dickerson on CBS's Face the Nation. I thought it was pretty much a big dodge by Senator Cory Gardner, especially on what he was basically caught saying that it was the big donors who are sending us to Washington to ram through this bill that everybody hates. And I don't think that John Dickerson did it. I mean, you can tell me if you think that was a good job of making that point. I don't know if you have seen those news stories, but it's pretty clear that, well, you know, Senator Cory Gardner from Colorado was also in charge of getting the Republican senators reelected in 2018, which it's most likely they will hold the Senate. That the House of Representatives is more likely up, but it would have to be like a big wave election for Democrats to take the House of Representatives. But the idea that Cory Gardner is denying that this is all political and based on the donors and possibly some of the Republican grassroots, well, you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. That's the show I have for you all. I appreciate the live viewers who showed up and put up with all the stream errors. I don't know why. It sometimes, I think it has more to do with like Xfinity Comcast than YouTube, but I really don't know why it is that sometimes my streams are too slow and there are these buffering and other problems. But I'll be uploading the recorded show. If there are any parts missing from the archive version of the live stream, hopefully it will get monetized by YouTube. I have no idea how it's going to work in the new system, but I appreciate all of you who showed up and supported the live show with your comments. Of course, with the super chat contributions, and especially I appreciate my patrons on Patreon who give me monthly support. You know, $1, $5 contributions really help offset the lack of YouTube ad revenue going all the way back to April. There's a link down in the video description. When your lifetime contribution reaches $30, you can get one of these candles like I have burning right here in front of the Antifa book. I only have about 15 or 20 of those left, so get them while they're hot, I guess I would say. Although I may come up with, I've been talking for quite a while about coming up with several new levels of rewards to try to make some last-ditch attempt to come up with a fan funding business model to make up for the lack of YouTube ad revenue. I'll see how that goes. But in any case, I appreciate all of you who support my videos financially or just by sharing on social media, giving me the supportive comments. I thank you. And of course, Sandy thanks you. And we will both be back next Sunday, spending 8 or 10 hours every Sunday gathering up the clips and putting them in some semblance of order, and then providing political analysis and media criticism commentary to try to put it all in context and set you off on your week with some understanding of what the corporate media thinks is important anyway. And I will be doing that, all of that, and until next week when I do all that again, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.